and said, "This is a king who shall reign over all the land." And Numu gave strength to his limbs. Then Isis stood before her, and Nebhat stood behind her, and Hakt helped her. And Isis said, "O child, by thy name of Kaku remain not in darkness in her." And the child came upon her hands, a child of a cubit, and its bones were strong. The beauty of its limbs was like gold, and its hair was like true lapis lazuli. And Meskhent approached him, and said, "This is a king who shall reign over all the land." And Numu gave strength to his limbs, and they washed him, and prepared him, and laid him on a carpet on the brickwork. And the deities went out, having delivered Rud didet of the 3 children. And they said, "Rejoice, O Ra-Usa, for, behold, 3 children are born unto thee." And he said unto them, "My ladies, and what shall I give unto ye? Behold, give this bushel of barley here unto your porter, that ye may take it as your reward to the brewhouse." And Numu loaded himself with the bushel of barley, and they went away toward the place from which they came. And Isis spake unto these goddesses, and said, "Wherefore have we come without doing a marvel for these children, that we may tell it to their father who has sent us?" Then made they the divine diadems of the king, life, wealth, and health, and laid them in the bushel of barley. And they caused the clouds to come with wind and rain, and they turned back again unto the house. And they said, "Let us put this barley in a closed chamber sealed up, until we return northward dancing." And they placed the barley in a closed chamber. And Rud didet purified herself with purification of 14 days. And she said to her handmaid, "Is the house made ready?" And she replied, "All things are made ready, but the brewing barley is not yet brought." And Rud didet said, "Wherefore is the brewing barley not yet brought?" And the servant said, "It would all of it long since be ready, if the barley had not been given to the dancing girls, and lay in the chamber under their seal." Rud didet said, "Go down and bring of it, and Ra-Usa will give them in its stead when he shall come." And the handmaid went, and opened the chamber, and she heard talking and singing, music and dancing, quavering, and all things which are performed for a king in his chamber. And she returned, and told to Rud didet all that she had heard. And she went through the chamber, but she found not the place where the sound was. And she laid her temple to the sack, and found that the sounds were in it. She placed it in a chest, and put that in another locker, and tied it fast with leather, and laid it in the storeroom where the things were, and sealed it. And Ra-Usa came from the field, and Rud didet repeated unto him these things. And his heart was glad above all things. And they sat down and made a joyful day. And after these days it came to pass that Rud didet was wroth with her servant, and beat her with stripes. And the servant said unto those that were in the house, "Shall it be done thus to me? She has borne 3 kings, and I will go and tell this to his majesty King Khufu the Blessed." And she went, and found the eldest brother of her mother, who was binding his flax on the floor. And he said to her, "Whither goest thou, my little maid?" And she told him of all these things. And her brother said to her, "Wherefore comest thou thus to me? Shall I agree to treachery?" And he took a bunch of flax to her, and laid on her a violent blow. And the servant went to fetch a handful of water, and a crocodile carried her away. Her uncle went therefore to tell of this to Rud didet. And he found Rud didet sitting, her head on her knees, and her heart beyond measure sad. And he said to her, "My lady, why makest thou thy heart thus?" And she answered, "It is because of this little wretch that was in the house. Behold, she went out, saying, I will go and tell it." And he bowed his head unto the ground, and said, "My lady, she came and told me of these things, and made her complaint unto me. And I laid on her a violent blow, and she went forth to draw water, and a crocodile carried her away." The rest of the tale is lost. Remarks. The tales of the magicians are preserved only in a single copy, and of that the beginning of the story is entirely lost. The papyrus was brought from Egypt by an English traveller, and was purchased by the Berlin Museum from the property of Lepsius, who had received it from the owner, Mr. Westcar. Hence it is known as the Westcar Papyrus. It was written probably in the 12th dynasty, but doubtless embodied tales which had been floating for generations before about the names of the early kings. It shows us probably the kind of material that existed for the great recension of the pre-monumental history made in the time of Seti I. Those ages of the first three dynasties were as long before that recension as we are after it, and this must always be remembered in considering the authority of the Egyptian records. This papyrus has been more thoroughly studied than most, perhaps more than any other. Ehrman has devoted 2 volumes to it, publishing the whole in photographic facsimile, transcribed into hieroglyphs, transcribed into the modern alphabet, translated literally, translated freely, commented on and discussed word by word, with a complete glossary of all the words used in it. This exhaustive publication is named De Machen des Papyrus Westkar. Moreover, Maspero has given it a current translation in the Contes Populaires, 2nd edition, pages 53 to 86. The scheme of these tales is that they are all told to King Khufu by his sons, and as the beginning is lost, 8 lines are here added to explain this and introduce the subject. The actual papyrus begins with the last few words of a previous tale concerning some other magician under an earlier king. Then comes the tale of Khafra, next that of Balfra, and finally that of Hordedef. It need hardly be said that these tales are quite fictitious. The king and his successor Khafra are real, but the other sons cannot be identified, and the confusion of supposing 3 kings of the 5th dynasty to be triplets, born early in the 4th dynasty, shows what very vague ideas of their own histories the Egyptians had when these tales were formed. This does not prevent our seeing that they embodied some very important traditions, and gives us an unequalled picture of the early civilization. In the earliest tale of the 3, there seems at first sight merely a sketch of faithlessness and revenge, but there is probably much more in it. To read it aright, we must bear in mind the position of woman in ancient Egypt. If in later ages Islam has gone to the extreme of man determining his own divorce at a word, in earlier times almost the opposite system prevailed. All property belonged to the woman. All that a man could earn or inherit was made over to his wife, and families always reckoned back further on the mother's side than the father's. As the changes in historical times have been in the direction of men's rights, it is very unlikely that this system of female predominance was invented or introduced, but rather that it descends from primitive times. In this tale we see, then, at the beginning of our knowledge of the country, the clashing of 2 different social systems. The reciter is strong for men's rights. He brings destruction on the wife, and never even gives her name, but always merely calls her the wife of Uba Anna. But behind all this, there is probably the remains of a very different system. The servant employed by the mistress seems to see nothing outrageous in her proceedings. Even the steward, who is on the master's side, waits a day or 2 before reporting matters. When we remember the supremacy in property and descent which women held in Egypt, and then read this tale, it seems that it belongs to the close of a social system like that of the Nairs, in which the lady makes her selection, with variations from time to time. The incident of sending a present of clothing is curiously like the tale about a certain English envoy whose proprieties were sadly ruffled in the Nair country when a lady sent him a grand shawl with an intimation of her choice. The priestesses of Amen retained to the last this privilege of choice, as being under divine and not human protection, but it seems to have become unseemly in late times. The hinging of this tale, and of those that follow it, upon the use of magic shows how thoroughly the belief in magic powers was ingrained in the Egyptians. Now such a belief implies the presence of magicians, and shows how familiar must have been the claim to such powers, and the practising of tricks of witchcraft, so prevalent in Africa in modern times. The efficacy of a model, such as this crocodile of wax, is an idea continually met with in Egypt. The system of tomb furniture and decoration, of Ka statues, of Ushabtis, or figures to work for the deceased, and the models placed in foundation deposits, all show how a model was supposed to have the efficacy of an actual reality. Even in the latest tale of all, written in Ptolemaic times, Set now makes a model of a boat and men to be sunk in the river to work for him. The reconversion of the crocodile to